Hey guys, and welcome back to episode number 4 of the 2 at KO podcast. I am your host, OG Albina, joined by my co-host, King L5, Poke Rapper, Draft League Extraordinaire. You know him, right above there. Say hello.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like Mew. You know how it goes.
Every once in a while. And we're joined by our guest this week in Addison. Do you want to say hi, introduce yourself, etc.?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Of course.
Yeah, I guess I'm Addison. I exist on YouTube sometimes, and I exist in team tournaments sometimes. So I'm definitely one of probably, few people who have their toes dipped in both worlds. And yeah, I've been playing Draft League for a while. I don't know. We'll
get into all that more later.
The podcast goes on, yeah.
But yeah, no, I think you're like one of the perfect guests for this kind of show. Like myself, you're a little bit more deeply enthralled in the Showdown scene than I am, but you are one of the few people that is playing a ton in Showdown, and has a ton of experience in Wi-Fi, even if it's not recently. Has played all throughout this gen and last gen, made a name for yourself in both scenes. So I think it's kind of what this podcast is here to kind of focus on and exemplify and stuff like that. But with that being said, we're going to jump right into the news, and something you guys are, deeply into right now is DCL playoffs and the playoff race and things like that. L5, do you want to give a quick rundown on how's it going and what's happening?
Yeah, so DCL, the playoffs are about to start in like one day or something like that. We're recording this on Sunday, and we would have had playoffs earlier, like starting this week, but some teams decided to tie break for that fourth slot in playoffs. So we have to wait for them to do their little best of 3. But yeah, the playoffs are going to start. We know the matchup for round 1 is going to be Band Chasers versus the winner of the tie break, which is Chrome Cabal, Addison's team, versus Nature's Madman. And then my team, Infernal Armory, will be playing Trick of Eye. It's going to be a great series.
There you go. And then have these tiebreakers, they haven't been concluded like completely, right? They're not done yet?
1-1 right now.
1-1.
Yeah.
What's that last game? What's the matchup?
Hey Crick versus Galap is
shit.
the matchup. So two very good players.
Yeah, very exciting.
Shit. It's going to be a Gen 9 battle. It's going to be...
Gen 9, everybody's favorite generation too. That's big. Very exciting. Nice.
I even stepped into Gen 9, so that was an experience.
You've been playing mostly Swish this tournament, right? Like pretty much exclusively, or have you played any other?
Prior to today, I have never played a team tour game that wasn't Sword and Shield. So this was my first ever.
That's fucking stressful. Step in tiebreak and have to play a gen that like you are. And again, you haven't been playing like any Wi-Fi things or anything like that lately, and you've been playing DCL the last like 2 months. So it's like 2 months removed from a serious Scarlet and Violet game in general.
Yeah, it was a lot.
There you go. That's fun. Speaking of Wi-Fi, we also have PPL finals, the matchup at the very least announced. It's going to be spoilers if you haven't watched. I guess you've had 2 days. Go watch it. If you're watching this, you probably have time to watch the PPL final or semi game, to be honest with you. But we have Uzi versus J Ricky. A pretty exciting matchup. I think a lot of people noticed J Ricky's having a great season. We're expecting kind of an Uzi AIM finals, but J Ricky pulled up. I didn't get a chance to watch it yet, but do you guys have any notes on that game or anything of the sorts?
So I just skimmed the game before we started recording, so I may get things a little bit incorrect, but it looked like AIM was kind of getting worked in the neutral in the early game, but then he set up a end game where Screamtail was actually poised to sweep, but then missed a Focus Blast on the Iron Treads. And Focus Blast was, of course, the correct pick into J Ricky's team. That's the annoying part about it, right? You have multiple, like, Thick Fat, Heat-Proof, Terra Steel types. So, like, man, what else are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to run Fire Blast or Flamethrower on your Scream? It's just wrong, right? So you have to run Focus Blast if you want to be, like, the correct set into his team, and then if you're the correct set, you run the chance of missing, which has unfortunately happened to both Mount8 and PokeAim versus J Ricky. They both had game-losing Focus Blast miss. I think on the Iron Treads.
I was gonna say, didn't Mount8 also lose on Iron Treads? Like, or the Iron Treads has just been nimble as shit.
It's the most nimble Iron Treads of all time. But the funny thing about it is, like, I don't know, like in spite of the RNG that like went into it, I obviously think Jay Ricky hasn't been necessarily playing bad. Like he's played those games.
You wouldn't
well
you wouldn't be in the spot you're in if you're playing bad. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But what's so funny is if he does beat Uzi in finals, whatever you want to say about the RNG, on paper that's probably the most impressive playoff run of the generation. Mount into AIM into Uzi.
Oh, 100%.
Like, in order to make a championship, like that would be it.
There is that like name value thing, but also like you dodge multiple focus blasts to get it done. So I was like, how?
Yeah, I'm
impressive
excluding
really
that, but I'm just saying.
Yeah,
on
if you just
paper,
take it,
you know.
yeah, on paper, name versus name, it is definitely a great accomplishment for him. Yeah.
And then
But
the Mount one though too.
Uzi.
I feel bad for the Mount one because like he missed, but I think he also kind of fumbled the end game just a little bit on the the Hariyama moveset. Kind of wondering what was I think wasn't he worried about like Terra Steel Bullet Punch, but it showed Terra Blast at that point, so you kind of like can assume like even if it's BP it wouldn't have killed, it had to be Terra Steel, so that was tough, but it's all hindsight shit, especially like when you're recording. Again, that's one thing I think people, especially if you play a lot of showdowns, stuff like that, you don't like recognize, like if you're like when you're sitting there commentating and talking and waffling, you'll 100% miss shit like that, so it's tough. But you were
just
saying
go right
Uzi?
over your head.
Oh yeah, just like Focus Blast.
Yeah.
But you're saying you helped Uzi a lot this week, and he ended up picking up a nice dub. I haven't watched that one either.
So yeah, we've been ramping up with me and Uzi. He's at like 7 mocks so far this week, and more to come. So we've been trying out different team styles once again. That's what we've been doing all playoffs. We have a balanced team, we have a HO team, we have something in the middle. See what works the best. And yeah, it should be a great game, honestly. The matchup is like a little bit even, slightly favored to Uzi, I think. So as long as nothing goes horribly wrong, I think we should be able to coast to a win. But that being said, Jay Ricky is he's gonna throw some wrenches in there, and it's up to
don't
Uzi
run any inaccurate moves. It's that easy. So
so true.
Yeah, well,
we'll do our best.
So far in mocks, there's only one sequence we found where we really have to rely on an inaccurate move, and if that happens, it happens. You know, we have to go for it. We've decided. But yeah, I've been helping him a lot, and he's putting in the work. It's nice to see. Yeah. And also, I've had the week off for DCL, so I've been able to like more focus on him, and then Owen, your BBL game.
Ooh, dude, I've had 3 weeks for that game, man. It's been bad. Dude, starting a month, I'm never doing it again. Oh my god. Speaking of which, I guess it's a perfect segue into a little bit more Wi-Fi news. We have our BBL draft stream. I'm going to move this a little bit just so you guys can see the date and the time. We're going to be running our draft stream this Saturday. It won't be here. It'll be on Joey's channel, but if you're in the BBL server, you can join it, based on the link on this video, which I'll link down here, or I'll just link the server as well. We have our draft stream at about 9 a.m. PST, 12 p.m. EST, going over the teams, things of the sort, and have our draft breakdowns, which should be cool. And then games will start next week, and you guys will see some fun Ubers clicking buttons and all that good stuff, which will be a good time. And then we have some Smogon news. We had summer seasonal finals, Big Belly Bolt, which we talked about last time we were on the podcast. That was an interesting end game. I remember watching that one live. I was really bummed I did not jump in, call, and record with you. It was definitely more entertaining than my Overwatch game.
Yeah. Okay, so let me paint a picture for you in your head. If you haven't watched the game, well, first off, you should probably watch the game, right? I recorded it as a live comm on my channel, but I'm going to give you the brief rundown of this end game, right? So, Havada has this Jirachi with Culverberry against Greninja. The Greninja is 100% in range of Psychic Noise, which he revealed later he did have.
It's Protean, by the way. It's also Protean, by the way.
Yeah, it's also Last Mon Greninja, by the way. So, you kill the Greninja, you win. It's very simple. Just click Psychic Noise. But what do? We Healing Wish up our Terra Zarude. Okay, sure, it still will take a hit from Greninja and kill back, right? Makes a little bit of sense. So Zarude back up to full. It's Terra Steel, so it's not weak to anything from Greninja. And gets flinched once by Dark Pulse, flinched twice by Dark Pulse, and the Greninja sweeps the entire endgame. Now, is it hacks? Yeah. Of course it's hacks, but like you gave him the opportunity to get that. You could have just take the KO. It's such a roundabout way of doing that
opposite. It's the exact opposite of what we just talked about with the Joey situation, where like Focus Blast was the correct ring. You have to click the move, you roll the dice, you didn't get the roll, like whatever. That sucks. Yeah, not here.
I have to clarify. I forgot to say the Greninja was Terra to a Fairy type, so Psychic Noise was a neutral click on it. It wasn't immune.
Oh, it wasn't Protean. Sorry,
That
it was
wasn't
Terra.
clear.
That's what it was. It was Terra. I forgot it wasn't
It
Protean.
was Terra Battle Bond,
Okay,
which is
my
why
bad.
it was threatening a sweep in the end game.
Yeah, no, I mean that was a tough one. I felt really bad.
Yeah.
It was and it was a game where like remind me the sides. It was PZZ with the Jirachi or with the Grand, and then it was Hab with the Rachi and the Zarud and
Jirachi,
things
yeah.
like that. Okay, yeah. I was Hab was like really commanding control like the entirety of the game too. He played really well.
Habuto was winning the game very comfortably.
Yeah, I mean,
But
like,
massive
I
robbery
remember
plus
watching
joke.
like, yeah, I remember watching the commentary that you all were doing, and like I
Ah,
think halfway through the video, it was just like, oh yeah, like this
this is
over.
over.
Like, this is,
Yeah,
this is like
there's
so
nothing
done.
PCZ can do.
Yeah.
Turns out there was something Habuto could do.
there's always a way to lose the game.
Yeah.
It is very
That's just
hard.
the moral of the story, right? Moral of the story: no matter how hard you throw, your opponent can throw harder. This is a constant through all levels of competition.
Oh,
Yeah, even high
Even
level, yeah.
the finals of the
Hab
the
is really
finals of
fucking
the
good,
biggest
man.
draft
Like,
tour
he's
of,
really...
of the year.
Mhm.
He's so good, but it's how you play on the day. And
All I'm saying is it does not
Unlucky.
help the Zarud agenda that you were pushing, man. I've seen a lot of Zarud games
no, it
lately.
does. It does. It does
It
help
does?
the agenda because Sarud should have won, which means if it lost, it didn't count.
Oh,
That's
that's
my
so,
math.
the same
That's
thing
my
in your
math.
stream too. It would lose and you'd be like,
Yep.
but they were bad. Never mind. Let's go on to the next replay.
We won if we clicked bulk up.
Oh shit! Yeah, but
Alright,
that was
alright.
what we forgot to pull up. I should have pulled up that game to simplify, but I'll link it down in the description, or you guys can check it out and smoke on and things like that. Something I can pull up.
No,
though,
check it out on my channel.
Oh,
Give me
that's so true. I'll dude, plug, huge plug. But we also have to talk about something
you know
that was
me and big plugs.
it was really
What?
really XL5. That was really big. Not this week, but last week. It was a big point of contention in the Smogon server, and it was Smogon. Or I don't know if it's just saying Smogon proposing it. People in like Smogon draft proposing a sleep ban from
Yes.
Scarlet and Violet draft, similar to the one that's currently running around in OU. I don't know if it's in the other tiers. I know it's in OU for sure though. Essentially just banning all sleep moves entirely and keeping sleep claws. And this is a pretty silly discussion. It did not get passed. Don't worry. I'm really glad it didn't get passed because if you're playing in leagues and tournaments that just are like, no, that's fucking stupid, you can't play on the draft tiers, which is really annoying, or you'd have to do some like custom rules with it.
Yeah.
Well, you would be able to. It's just
you
for
would?
Smogon tournaments. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, wouldn't it be in the tier though that sleep is banned, like in Gen
No,
9
no,
draft?
no.
Oh no. Okay, then I misunderstood.
Because the tier is a lot more open than everything. It's just that would be on the rules doc.
Oh,
So
okay.
if
I
you
get you.
Don't follow that, you're forfeiting the game.
Okay, so they wouldn't like
But, like,
hard code
it
it to like
opens for
don't let
all-
you sleep.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's
gotcha.
the same reason why the tier allows Ubers, even though
They
all
aren't
banned,
actually allowed.
right?
Yeah.
Because you can use it for Uber's League. Anyways, so this is Big Smogon. It's really just a few of the guys on the moderator team that saw a Ninetales click hypnosis a few too many times, and they were like, "This has to stop."
I won't stand for this anymore.
Right?
All the other crazy shit that runs around SV sometimes, we're like, Ninetales is pissing me off. I'm so sick of it.
I'll give the context for it. Is in
Okay, go
DCL there's a player named Kaif who I didn't know much about before the start of the season, and hypnosis is just his favorite move. And I think like the first like 5 weeks he like went 5-0 or maybe like 4-0 or something like that. And most of his games, probably more than half of his games, was him just Hail Marrying clicking hypnosis with Ninetales, and Bronzong I think was the other one that he did.
Dude,
it with
I
at
saw
some
so
point
much
in the season.
Bronzong discussion in that chat. It
Yeah.
was making me lose
Yeah.
my mind.
So, but it's one of those. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why banning sleep is very silly. Whether you're talking about Darkrai alone or like everything in general. But it was so funny to have the conversation of like, why are we banning sleep outright, like Spore and Yawn and all that stuff, just because of Darkrai? And they're like, well, it's not because of Darkrai. It's because of Ninetales and it's because of Bronzong. And I'm like, really? I don't know. So, yeah, there's been some hypnosis propaganda in the. I don't know if it's propaganda, but.
It was. I don't think it worked, so I don't know if it's going to be probably. I mean, to be fair though, there was a lot of people who voted to have this banned. I don't know if it was just people saw and they're like, "Dude, fuck hypnosis. That shit pisses me off," and then clicked no or clicked ban. But I mean, it was 60-48. It wasn't by that much that Sleep Clause stayed. Like, I was very surprised. And early on, banning Sleep was winning by like a decent amount until people started screaming in the general chat. Like, I know Keegan. I was in call with Keegan that day when he was losing it in general. I mean, completely hyper fixated, just stared at his computer for the next 4 hours, losing his mind about Ninetales and Bronzong Hypnosis. Like, he was genuinely. I was pissed. I was at work. I was pissing myself, dude. He was genuinely really upset. So it was really surprising how close this came to pass.
Well, I will say the vote that you see on the forums is not actually a vote to ban it.
Mhm.
It's the vote to see the community perception
Oh,
and
okay.
if it would go to a vote from like council members and like.
Oh, okay. So if it went to a vote from council members, would that? So like, if within the Smogon draft council they decided like, yes,
I don't know
ban
how
it
it would exactly work.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe it would work like that. I'm not too
I'm curious
sure.
because
But
I mean,
this was just to see if there's demand for it, which at the end of the day there is some. Like, the arguments for it is just that Sleep Clause is kind of archaic, right? It's from a side game way back in the day, and it hasn't existed in any game for like 20 years at least.
The idea is it's not cart legal or cart possible. Yeah.
It's not cart enforceable when it comes to like effect spore and stuff like that. But at the same time, right, we've played with Sleep Clause for so long, it's part of the game now, like it or not. And within a draft context, Sleep is not broken. There's ways to prep for it when it comes to like the actual good sleep moves, Spore, even Sleep Powder, a little bit more accurate. When it comes to Hypnosis, like the math checks out where you're barely getting a turn advantage.
You are,
average,
but then also like there have been
it's
situations
not even always a turn advantage on average. It's like less than 1 turn advantage, and the risk of missing is huge. So generally, Hypnosis is only seen on Pokemon that literally don't have a better option. Bronzong, Ninetales, and then Darkrai is a little bit different because it has Bad Dreams. There's a little bit more reward for hitting it. It's also quite fast, so sometimes you get 2 chances, but
I know in OU, one of the mons that was like, they were like, fuck this guy's annoying, like, with Sleep was like Valiant, but that's also a mon that's never going to have that case in draft, right? Like, there's always 4 better moves to run than Hypnosis on Valiant, or at least most of the time, I don't know.
I think the thing that's like that L5 was like reiterating, or was saying that I think is important reiterating is Hypnosis isn't even damaging when it lands all of the time, because there's situations where you land a Hypnosis, the mon's asleep, and then the mon has a 1 in 3 chance of just waking up immediately afterwards. So it doesn't end up being like even a directly 60-40 thing. I think it ends up being even less than that, I think. So
with the risk of just completely losing a turn and getting fucking nothing out of it. Like, literally nothing out of the turn.
You get nothing with a massive risk. Like,
in such a fast-paced metagame too.
Yeah, in a game where a fast mon like Ninetales clicks Hypnosis on Salamence sleeps for 1 turn as Ninetales switches out, and then wakes up the next turn. That was like total negative like value out of that entire sequence. I don't know.
The thing is that it introduces variability where maybe we could have avoided it. And there's an argument there where that could potentially make it so that the better player does not win as often. By introducing more variance. But I don't think that's as compelling of an argument as maybe it seems, considering that I did the numbers. We've seen Hypnosis in about 4% of draft teams in DCL. So if something's getting a 4% usage, I can't say it's broken, you know what I mean? People would be spamming it if it were broken.
There are more mons with Hypnosis.
Because these people are trying to win, you know? Everyone's trying their hardest, and if Hypnosis was the way to win, they'd be using it. But this is something I saw from Genius. Like Valiant, as an example, will always have more reliable sets, more options.
And especially in a team tour environment where you're doing mocks over and over and over again, and statistically you're going to miss Hypnosis in half of those mocks, it's very difficult to actually like walk away from those mocks and say, I'm going to do this, because the variability in success and not success is so huge. And I mean, we have a team with Darkrai on it, and every single time we built with it, we've said, okay, we can put Hypnosis on this thing, but it's really only if we have like a spare slot, because, you know, clicking it and that being the entire strat to do with like a Tinglu or a Diancie or something like that
it's another mon that's it's another mon that's also it's hard to justify doing that. And again, there are more options in a metagame like this where like, yeah, you can be like Hypnosis and cheese down the Tinglu like that, but you could be a more reliable Will-O-Wisp instead, right? And chip it down that way a little bit slower and nerf its damage output and not be clicking 60% accurate Hypnosis. So I don't know, it's interesting. I think SV's too fast to where like you can really, you know, justify clicking that in a lot of instances. And again, like you said, in a team tour environment, you're trying to not only find a path to win, but find the most reliable and consistent path to win. And 60% is not a reliable and consistent path. You know, it just isn't. I mean, Focus Blast is damn near considered not that. You don't want your games to come down to Focus Blast, right? We just talked about that. That's 10% more accurate. That hits, you know, another time that Hypnosis wouldn't. So I don't know. It was a bit silly. I'm here for it though. I think shit like this is fun. Like discussing. I think that's the fun part of like draft and discussion. You know, one person feeling super strongly about it and another person feeling not very strong. I don't know. It's cool. Like I know Scribble had a cool take on fucking Lugia in SV, and I totally want to make a video on it. Not that I agree at all, but I think shit like that's cool. So I think that's definitely really dope. But other than that, I think that's kind of the news for the day. We can kind of jump on and get a little bit into, you know, our guest-specific questions for you, Addison, and kind of what's going on. And we kind of want to start off with nice and simple. What's your story? How did you start in draft? You know, what's the progression from right when you first played your first, you know, Gen 6, Gen 7 Draft League game to where you are now?
Jeez. Okay.
Easy question.
Or the Cliff Notes, at least. You don't have to be like, you know, August 13th.
I am a zapper, so let me like really like make it.
You're good.
I started playing Draft League like basically around 2018, mid 2018, where I became friends with someone named Matthew, aka formerly Dr. Slacking. And he sort of invited me into like his fold of like smaller, more casual like draft leagues. But what's really funny is there were some players in that group that have some level of like notoriety. Like I think one that like L5 knows, like Checkmate was part of that group. Mm-hmm. Checkmate Ben from DPL, among a bunch of other like decent players. And then but it was mostly a casual thing. And I just fell in love with Draft League throughout the time, and I was doing a bunch of like showdown, fun, like small things. And it was mostly just casual. And then, you know, lockdown hit, and I started playing a lot more and met a few new people, dove into a couple different tournaments. But it wasn't until like sort of later towards the lockdown where I really wanted to start venturing into Wi-Fi, mostly because the aforementioned Matt had done so as well. And I think that was what got me really into Draft League, was when I was doing Wi-Fi in Generation 8, which I know has this like really bad reputation of, you know, the timer was terrible and no one wanted to play it and the setup was awful, and like, you know, that's a whole conversation for another day. But I personally really enjoyed that meta. I really enjoyed that way to play. I really enjoyed Gen 8 Wi-Fi, and so much so that I like spent a lot of time building leagues within that community and really trying to like shape the meta and things like that. So that was really where I feel like I sort of flourished as a Draft League player. Once Gen 8 was over at the end of like 2022, I said to myself, all right, I'm done. I've just moved to England. I'm gonna not really play Draft League again. And then that's when like Joey Pokémon came in, and like, you know, and other folks, and they were like, oh, we want to play Draft League again. And Jack, the commissioner of PPL, was like, you should come back. And I was like, I don't even know the game. And he was like, I'll buy you the game. And I'm like, all right. So then I bought the game, and that was fun. I did a little PPL league with Joey Pokegame. And then I guess the important thing to mention as well is throughout that time when I was doing the Joey Pokegame League, I got scouted by someone named Rye to participate in some team tours. And I was really hesitant because obviously, like, you know, the communities. I sometimes feel like certain communities in Team Tour environments can be toxic if you sort of end up in the wrong fold of people. I'm always very wary of that, so I was like very hesitant at first, but Ryan ended up convincing me to play. And I guess the other like person who was really helpful as well to me was Zezo, who is like considered one of the best draft league players of all time. We lived very close to each other when I lived in Michigan, so we hung out in person a lot, and he kind of like sold the like play draft league competitively on Showdown thing to me over time. So he's actually probably been like the biggest person when it comes to like influencing how I think about the game and draft league and building and everything like that, just because we had that close personal relationship too. That was a lot. So, but that's kind of the story of Addie and how she's come to be. And now I'm playing in another Team Tour, and it's going pretty good. So that's where we are now.
There you go.
Very cool, very cool. So recently, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. You won PPL, and then immediately went to DCL and have an undefeated record. Is there something
during the middle of that, I did Owen's low tier league, which was pretty fun. I think I made it all the way to finals of that one. I had like half my shit stolen, like including my laptop and all that stuff, so it kind of ended a bit abruptly for me. But yeah, that was kind of like, I loved that league and I really enjoyed like the low tier stuff. But I think midway through that league, I was like, this is too much Wi-Fi for me. Like I put in so much effort into PPL, and then I was doing this next Wi-Fi season, and I was like, this is a lot. Like content creation is becoming very exhausting for me. I'm simultaneously trying to like build a life in London, and
it's time consuming, yeah.
Kind of, like do other things, yeah. And I slowly realized I didn't have the time for it. So while team tours are very known to be very time consuming, what I can appreciate about them right now, at least for my life, is that I can do them in my own time. Like I can show up and show out whenever I don't need to, but with Wi-Fi leagues you're on a much more like strict schedule that other people are, having you adhere to, and that just doesn't make as much sense for me in my point of life right now.
100%. So anyways, my point is you're winning everything, so success all over the place, right?
I mean, like yes, I would say so. I think yeah, okay, sure.
I mean, I'm calling it what I see. 8-0 in DCL. That's a feat nobody has done before. I know Craig had a 8-0 run in DPL, which is kind of the parallel tournament, but in DCL that's unheard of. And then PPL, obviously you won, but that team was super broken. Like
yeah. There is an asterisk.
It's like DOSP, Zama,
yeah.
random mid-season Zama grab.
It was well, the original. I think the original team was quite strong as well. I remember in Lux and L5's power rankings, I was right behind Mount is because I had DOSP Greninja just in the draft alone, and then Chase decided to drop Zamazenta Crowned for some reason, and I was awake at like 4 a.m. and called with a few other Wi-Fi players, and they were like, "Oh my god, what just happened?" And without saying a word, I just like dropped half my team for the Zamazenta Crowned.
We'll fix this shit later.
Everyone got so mad at me, and but like that ended up going quite well.
That was so great.
Yeah.
Anyways, so obviously you're doing something that works. What do you think you're doing differently than other players at the current time?
I think this is going to make some people roll their eyes, but I think the fact that I come from a Wi-Fi background, and I'm not saying the Wi-Fi community often has very well-established norms, but what it did do for me is it sort of meant that everyone who's been an established draft league player in team tours for a very long time, for 5 years, 6 years, whatever, has sort of all similarly developed these metas of different generations and what they think is good and what play styles they think are best. And that wasn't something that happened on the Wi-Fi scene. On the Wi-Fi scene, you were encouraged to play with a bunch of different mons because you had bigger, player pools, and you had, content incentive to try, certain things and certain play styles and things of that sort. So I think when I was like thrown into the team tour environment and was originally told, it's like, okay, these are the things that are good and these are how you play them. And then I played it and I was like, I get it, but it's not really like, I feel like I can do more and like figure out more and just play a little bit different and try and like
not as rigid in your thinking.
not as rigid in my thinking and be as anti-meta as humanly possible. So one of the biggest things I did in the first DCL I did was I basically went back and I watched all like the DPL Gen 8 replays from the season prior, as well as the Gen 8 replays of the current DCL season, and just kind of identified like that the meta was so balance heavy. And when I say so balance heavy, I quite literally mean like 80 to 90% of the games are balance games. And it made me sort of think to myself, like, if I just kind of like front load a ton of like hyper offensive play with like bold predictions and like easy, like, or not easy, but like really high risk calls at the start of the game and like overwhelm my opponents with that pressure, I think it's something that hasn't necessarily been seen, or at least from what I saw, wasn't necessarily seen. And I think I've taken that philosophy and sort of amplified it to the max this DCL season, and that's probably why I think there's some level of success there. Yeah,
awesome. That's like pretty similar to what I've heard Blunder say about his own play style. He'll definitely like make the aggressive play early when most people are playing safe, because they don't want to risk their win con or whatever, or like I don't want to stay in with my Ferrothorn on a Heatran. But
well, that's the thing is, I mean, we were just talking about this before the call. Was so I just played the tiebreaker game against Yurdunk. This was a Gen 9 game actually, so not Gen 8, but same principle applied. Was on turn 2 there was a paralyzed Tornadus against a Dragonite that had revealed no offensive moves, and I was icy winded as well, and there was a chance that a Uxie came in on the Dragonite. There was a chance that this Tornadus stayed in, but there was also an Iron Treads in the back and a Bomb Snow in the back, and I evaluated that clicking Flamethrower, while probably doing very little to Torn or doing very little to Uxie, the value of getting that play right if he went into one of the other two mons was so much higher. So to me, sometimes the way I play is I sort of make these risks early on where I say, the value of getting this play right is so good that I'm going to do it, even if I think there's only a 30% chance that they truly make that play. And it ends up being the case that, like, then that ends up working out. And I flamethrowed in a Bomb Stone and killed it on turn 2. So, like, it's that type of thing that, like, I think is how I approach, like, playing itself. And then I think I'm just a really creative builder as well, which is...
That's also something I've seen... really highlighted in Zezo. He has like a very different thought process to most people, in that he thinks of mons as early game, mid game, and late game.
Yes. And it's smart to think about this, because it's hard for me to realize that other people don't think about these things. But when I literally craft my teams, I craft my team like I would a story. I create like a beginning and I create an end, and then I create like a rising action in between. So I always have a dedicated lead that is meant to like win most scenarios, like 99% of scenarios. And I always have a dedicated win condition, which can of course like flex depending on certain game states, but like generally speaking, I have an ideal optimal win condition, and then the rest of the build really comes about getting from point A to point B. And that's, I think, just a general like building philosophy that Zezo taught me that has stuck with me like to today.
I think that's 100% like the correct way to build like an offensive structure, and that's something I try to do in my own games as well. Sometimes I get it right, sometimes a little bit less. Sometimes it ends up being more like balance-ish in the actual game, but the idea is I'm building towards a win condition, and I have a checklist of things that need to happen for that win condition to win, and I'm trying in the mid game to get that checklist all checked off.
Exactly.
Position my win con. But when it comes to like balance, people don't think that way at all. Especially in Sword and Shield, people are way more happy to just sit there, get off a slow U-turn, then I get my breaker in, and then I'll get a strong hit, but then I'll go back to my regen core or my bulky Pokemon, I'll get a slow flip turn, and then I'll get my breaker in. It's like a slow burn kind of thing, which sometimes does work, but it doesn't have the same explosiveness as like, this weird offense style that you've been using the whole season.
Well, and that's the thing is, the team that I'll always point to is the main team. I've actually used all 3 of our Sword and Shield teams so far, but the main team that I've found enjoyment with, because it's the most anti-meta, is a Kartana Galarian Darmanitan team.
Mhm.
And it basically has no defensive backbone. It's like Togekiss, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's like there's two birds on it. Like if you were a checkbox like drafter who's like, you need a grounded poison, you need this, you need that, like you would vomit at this draft. And it's why most of my team was like, this is a bad draft that we need to change during mids. But I don't tend to care about those sort of things because those are things that I think are more appropriate for balanced playstyles. For offensive playstyles, I just want to like pound as many good mons into like, you know, the fucking game as possible. And it's been successful because turns out not a lot of teams, even balanced teams, actually especially balanced teams, can't have dedicated checks to Kartana and Galarian Darmanitan.
Yeah, they're just way too strong.
Yeah, and then also simultaneously deal with Necrozma, Galarian Moltres, Togekiss, like things like that. Like if like you have two mons like Galarian Darmanitan and Kartana that are both insane physical offensive monsters, and the opponent only has one really strong physically defensive tank, you use one to overwhelm the physically defensive tank, and then the other one goes wild. So that's always been sort of a philosophy for how I've approached like matchups and things like that.
Yeah, one real quick thing I'm gonna say before we can probably move on because we've spent a while on this topic. This like weird offense archetype that I've talked about. What do I mean by weird offense? It's just throwing a bunch of problems at your opponent and telling them you have to solve this problem, and then you have to solve this problem, and then this problem, and it's all back to back. And that's something that's really hard to adjust to in the moment. You know, you can have as many mocks as you want, but when Galarian Darm comes in with a choice banded Icicle Crash, what is that useful for? You have to pick a Pokemon to sack, or you know, you go to maybe like an Arcanine or a really bulky Steel type. If they Earthquake, you're cooked. Like there's no 100% way out of the situation. So you keep presenting these problems that have to be solved, and eventually they're gonna mess up. Like nobody's gonna make every correct call.
And I'll add one quick point that I promise will be very quick, is something I've discovered this DCL in particular that I think I was especially effective at in my first few games, is using the timer on Showdown to your advantage. Because not only are you putting players like that in that position, but if you have the first 5-6 turns planned out where you're going to make your opponent figure out a puzzle in the first 6 turns of the game, and they're spending all of the time on Showdown figuring that out, and they have a much lower timer than you do, like, yeah, they're gonna fuck up. And I think that's been like the biggest thing, is like having like a game plan from the beginning, almost like a script that I give myself for the first like 10 turns, and clicking buttons quick so that the opponent's timer goes down further than my timer, and it makes them panic at some point and make a misplay, and then that's that. So that's something that I didn't, ironically, I lost my first Team Tour game on a timer, which, you know, is quite funny. It's funny how it's come full circle. But I remember like my game against Glop, for example, at the start of the season, like I was really timer pressing him like hard, and I think you know, that was a lot. So yeah, I don't know. I think you add all those factors together, and it's a lot. It's good.
It's kind of like a chess analogy that I see all the time. Taking someone into a deep dark forest, you know, and the path is only wide enough for one of you. I think that's what it was. It's been a while since I've, you know, actually watched chess content, but it's something like that. You know, you're presenting a puzzle and they have to solve it, whereas you already have it figured out. They're the ones that have to.
The pressure is on them. Yeah.
Anyways.
100%. So we've obviously talked a lot recently, big team tour success, things like that, but obviously lots of Wi-Fi success as well with PPL, with Champions of Galar last generation, things like that. Do you, and I think we've kind of maybe answered this in just how we've discussed these, do you have a preference, whether it be right now or just all time, whether it be like Wi-Fi or Showdown when it comes to Draft League? Because again, like you said, the verses are like completely different. It's a very different feel on both sides, at least to my to my personal feelings on it.
I think one thing to preface with is that there's a lot of Showdown players who think Wi-Fi is a breeze, and there's a lot of Wi-Fi players who don't like Showdown. And the thing is someone, and especially this gen, and because the formats are so different, but something that Owen, you and I will probably be one of the maybe 5-10 people in this community who can say is they are fundamentally different games. And like, the pressure of whether it's commentary, information hunting when you're playing Wi-Fi, such as doing calcs and trying to figure out how much damage something did, trying to like catch these things in the moment rather than having like a log of like things that Showdown provides. Obviously, the things that Showdown provide lead to higher skill games, but Wi-Fi forces thinking on your feet more. Recently, I've enjoyed Showdown more because I think it does allow me to sort of come up with the most like optimal sequences ever that I can possibly try and find. And to me, that's a little puzzle that I've really enjoyed and really liked. But I think something that I'll push back on against players who think that Wi-Fi is this like breeze is that there is a big acclimation process. Like I know you all touched on this, like your episode 1 or maybe episode 2 of this is between the timer and the information hunting and commentating and all the little things that goes into an actual game and having to be on 100% of the time all the time definitely changes the conditions of the games a bit. So right now it's Showdown, but I go back and forth.
They are completely different experiences. Yeah, you have to be so much more reactive. And again, I always say it when I'm playing in a Showdown game. I'm sitting in my room with my fucking lights off, have some music in my ears, and I'm just staring at the screen. I'm not talking. I'm not I'm 100% locked in. And again, even if my results aren't as good on Showdown because there is higher competition, I always feel like I play better on Showdown, always, than I do on Wi-Fi. Even a game where I feel 100% prepared, I'll go back and watch Wi-Fi game. What the fuck did I do there? Like, why did I do that?
I think it's impossible. I mean, unless you're really weird, I think it's impossible to play better on Wi-Fi than you do on Showdown because there's so many factors on Wi-Fi that are lacks of information that you're not getting, or there's so many things on.
Is this a role? Is this not a role?
Yeah,
shit,
exactly.
That kind of thing.
There's active hindrances on Wi-Fi that are probably quite annoying to some people and completely turn people off from the idea altogether. But I think also simultaneously it forces more gut decisions, more quick thinking, more stuff like that.
And that can be exciting for some people, especially like I mean, if you ever compare like some random, if I compare like some random tournament game like a summer seasonal top 32 game opposed to like my week 4 of XD PCL, random Wi-Fi league, I get way more worked up in those games because of the high intensity.
And the inherent panic on Wi-Fi that also comes with the every turn timer. You have 60 seconds to like choose your play every single turn. When that shit counts down,
you
to,
see
like,
the 10 seconds pop up, and you're like,
it's literally on the screen, like 10, 9, 8, and you're deciding between two things. It's like you freak out, and like that's not something that has to like that most people in the Showdown draft league scene have to grapple with, unless it's unless they've horrifically mismanaged their timer.
I've seen it multiple times where like a Showdown person will just step into Wi-Fi and try. They'll eventually figure it out, but I've seen multiple Showdown people try and step into Wi-Fi and just shit the bed because of something similar like that. Like people who are much better in theory than everybody in the league, and they go 2-6 or something like that. So
it's an acclimation process.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The biggest thing. When I started playing on Wi-Fi in my first Wi-Fi league, I went 1-4 in like my first 5 weeks, and I ended up like picking it up after that, but it was a big learning curve, and like that is what it is.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I've only done one Wi-Fi league in my entire life. I feel like I've underperformed compared to my expectations in that. That was a long time ago though, so that was like 2018, maybe early 2019. So yeah, a couple years ago. But I felt like even though I made playoffs and I kind of like bowed out in the first round, I was like, I could have done better than that. And like my record was like 4-4 or something like that. I was like, I have a higher expectation of myself than that.
Yeah.
Especially considering who my competition was at the time.
Yeah.
It's like, I should be better than all these people. A little bit of an ego, right? But
the draft league player,
that was when I was like, I just won my first major tournament. I'm like, I'm the best ever. Something that happens before you get humbled.
In random Wi-Fi league,
that's my only experience with Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll change that. We're starting the GoFundMe tomorrow. King L5 Switch. Oh man, it's happening.
If this video gets 30 likes, I will join a Wi-Fi league
he keeps
tomorrow.
doing this shit, by the way, where he sets really, really low goals for something he's not gonna do at all. He'll be like, dude, 5 likes on the video, will buy me a Switch. $300 down the drain.
Yeah, right.
It's fucking hilarious.
2 likes and we'll give away like free shit. One random commenter. Yeah, I don't know. I think the other caveat too is like, if I'm playing as an individual, I probably prefer Wi-Fi to Showdown, but team tours are just so fucking fun. Like,
especially if you find that right team environment. I think I am a firm believer in that, and my experience is obviously way less than L5's and probably less than yours at this point, Addison, but I've had some great experiences in team tours where they've been a lot of fun, but I've also had some fucking terrible ones, you know, and it really does just depend on the team that you get drafted on, and I think it really is kind of a captain thing, and you know how the captain set up the environment and the server. It can suck, and then you get that shitty team that's 1-4, and there's no mocks happening, there's no nothing. It's tough. So it really does depend. It is the peak performance or like peak way to play if all people are firing on all levels. So
yeah, I got really lucky so this is my second team tour I've played in, this DCL2, and I've been lucky getting really good captains and really good teams for those 2 times, and I dread a team tour experience that will inevitably happen at some point where you don't have a captain who's on top of things, or you have a team that doesn't get on well with each other or anything like that. But shout out to Zing, Rai, K-Crick, and Loki P, all fucking excellent captains.
Yeah, goats.
Like genuinely awesome people. Yeah,
that's like one of the things I look for most when I'm building my rosters, because I've captained a lot. I'm looking for people who are going to be fun to be around, who are active, who are good at the game. You know, obviously you want people who are good at the game, but like personalities that I think will mesh well. That's something I really, really try to do if I can.
Yeah. Sometimes
you get what you can get, but I think this tournament for DCL2, I really, really like the team that I've drafted. It's maybe not the most fun I've had in a team tour, but it's certainly like the highest quality roster that I've ever drafted, and I really believe in this team that we can go the distance.
Hell yeah.
Big, you hear it here. They're gonna win, guys. We're gonna flash back to this in a month and laugh at you
Not if we get
don't.
you first.
No, true, and then we're gonna flash that one if you don't win. Beyond that, I think we actually kind of covered the next question on our own. The 8-0 DCL run, and how that felt and things like that. So we kind of just want to end off the interview part. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. With what's your favorite mon, and then does that differ from your favorite mon to use in draft? I like when we asked this last week to Mount. This was L5's idea, because I noticed all the mons I think are cool now are all guys I use in draft. I feel like I'm very old now, because I'm like, this guy's sick because I got like fucking 20 kills with it one time 2 years ago. Like, this guy's dope, and they're all cool, big, scary mons. But then you'll have people be like, dude, I love fucking Squirtle, So I'm curious see if there's a difference in that, or if there's a big crossover in the two.
There is virtually no crossover whatsoever.
Yeah,
my favorite mons are like the most oddball mons of all time. I would say my top 4 favorite mons right now in order are Togekiss, Minun, Altaria, and like, I don't even know. I'm like looking at my plushies somewhere, but I don't know. Like those types of mons are ones that I like. Togekiss I love so much because when I was a kid, I was playing Platinum. That was my first game, and I got stuck at a gym puzzle. I couldn't figure out the gym puzzle, and this was like before like the era of walkthroughs. And I traded my starter away to some scumbag at the school. So I was like, I just had this Togepi that came out of this egg, and I was stuck at the gym. So for like 6 months, I just like ran back and forth in this route with this Togepi. And then by the time I like figure out this gym puzzle, I had this like massively overpowered like Togekiss that I just like bolted the rest of the game through. And so that's like a nostalgic thing for me. And I'm getting to use Togekiss for the first time ever in Draft League in DCL, which is another reason why like I'm really loving this season, because I get to use my actual favorite Pokemon in Draft League. But in Draft League, it always changes. Like last DCL, it was like Melmetal and like Eldegoss. This season, it's
Eldegoss.
Like,
that is a Pokemon.
Eldegoss was like my low tier champion of DCL 1. And then this season, it's mostly like Necrozma, Kartana, like really, really just strong, versatile mons that pack a punch. not very bulky dudes. But yeah, like I would say my favorite mon to use in Draft League consistently throughout the years has probably been Weavile. Like fast, powerful, really easy to position, and flexes on a lot of different types of teams. That's my answer.
There you go.
Cool
Well,
stuff.
I think we can kind of pivot into our waffling section where we've kind of been talking a lot of Sword and Shield lately. Obviously, you've been playing a lot of Sword and Shield in DCL, and we've been kind of talking some team concepts and things like that. I wanted to start off, I think this is really interesting because I, as someone who played it when it was current gen, but I haven't played a ton of Sword and Shield outside a random Smogon tournament here or there. You guys have in the notes here, we are playing Swish wrong in all caps. So very passionate about this one, but I'm one of the people personally, when I think of Sword and Shield, I like Sword and Shield, by the way, too. It's probably my favorite metagame outside of Usum, and Usum, it's probably just nostalgic reasons. Like, I really love Swish when I was playing at current gen, but towards the end, it felt soft to me. It felt very, like you guys said, fucking 80% of teams are running fat, bouncy, regen, pivoting teams and things like that, and getting your breaker and slowly whittle away and find that opportunity to break through. I'm curious as to what you mean by we're playing Swish wrong, as in there's just key concepts that people are missing, or there's key team structures that people are just completely overlooking, or what do you guys exactly mean by this?
Should I go for it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think like the first thing is what we talked about earlier, which is 89% of the games are like balance games, and I found that was quite easy to exploit. If you kind of map out like what are the same, quite literally 20 mons that are being used in the Sword and Shield meta, it becomes quite easy to build anti-meta teams. But then you might ask the question, why did this not happen earlier? And the answer that I have, I'm not sure if L5 will agree with me on this, is I don't think Gen 8 truly developed as a meta until Spectrier was banned from the tier list. Because what you would see on tier lists, or what you'd see on drafts, you can use DCL 1 as an example, is every single team was a 7-mon team with a normal type. With
Munchlax!
With Munchlax or Greedent or whatever. And the thing about that is when you have an even more limited amount of spots to get from, because you have to have a dedicated Spectre check, you're going to go for like the most role compression options as possible, which forces a lot of balance type drafts. So you were seeing a ton of Nidos and Zaruds and Slowbros and all these types of like fat mons that like were able to kind of defensively catch all, because there weren't just enough roster slots, because you had to get a roster slot to Spectrier. So I think that since Spectrier has been banned in the last two major team tours, being DPL and DCL, it's allowed people to use that 8th slot a lot more creatively and a lot more flexibly, which I think is going to make the meta different than it once was before. I think one example is like Snorlax was like a 10-pointer in the tier list in DCL this season, but it really is only a 10-pointer because it's one of the best Spectrier checks in the game. Realistically, 7-point Beware is better, which would never be used as a Spectrier check because of Psychic, but 7-point Beware like does more in an 8-mon format. So that's like one example of like just certain things that can change. I think the other thing as well, and I know we're going to go into a conversation about like usage and stuff like that, is when everyone's trying to roll compress the same mons and does the same 20 mons, you have all of these mons that are like Lele or like Zygarde or like, I don't know, other examples that are basically really bad at roll compressioning, ground types without stealth rocks, or fairy types without any like defensive viability, that are in these really high price points and then never get picked up. So by moving those like really, by moving mons like that much lower, it shakes up the meta very interestingly. So that's kind of like, it has to do mostly with the tier list, but I think we're playing it wrong because we've been forced to play it wrong because of the threat of Spectrier over the past few years, if that makes sense.
Makes sense to me.
Cool.
This is like,
he started shaking his head really fast when you said Spectrier. He was like,
Hell yeah. This is something that I had been advocating for a long time before it actually happened. And I was like, well, this thing is pretty broken, but the teams aren't losing at lead to it, because everyone's drafting around it. But forcing people to draft around it is unhealthy. It's over-centralizing, and then you end up with very samey looking teams. There's not a whole room for experimentation in that kind of thing. I know some people were just like, F it, screw the Spectre check. And those teams actually ended up being a little bit more successful on average, but if they run into Spectrier, they're cooked. So like, you're trading the advantage into everything else versus losing to Spectre, which is like such a bad trade to make in like mentally.
Yeah.
So I do agree. That's when like Sword and Shield Galar decks really started.
And the irony is that only happened very recently. That only happened
like
when Gen 9 existed
this year.
in the first place. So it's
like
like
literally
post-gen,
2024.
there's so much to, I think, fully
It's
explore.
like
I think-
Dougie and old gens in OU and
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? Like we realized Dougie was broken. We're like, oh shit, hold on, maybe Dougie's broken, and Gen 4, that kind of thing. So
So it's not that we're playing like Sword and Shield wrong necessarily. Like balance will always be a coherent playstyle. It's more that there's so many playstyles that have been forced away, that players have been forced away from, that are just completely unexplored. And I'm very intrigued to like be a part of the Gen 8.
You just didn't see a lot of You didn't see a lot of Gen 8 like offense. Like it really didn't exist. I mean, on Wi-Fi you would. We talked about that before. People just draft whatever the fuck they want on Wi-Fi. Which again, the teams on Wi-Fi were fun. There was a ton of Azels running around in Gen 8, like a bunch of random guys like that.
Round 1 Galarian Darmanitan.
Oh,
like,
big,
thing,
dude.
right? So, like,
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be cool to see that kind of experimented with a little bit more, because when I think of Gen 8, I do just think of balance. That is all I think of. So and again, I like Gen 8, and I know that's why a lot of people hate Gen 8, is because it was a bunch of torn regen spam and Glowking and Slowking, Click and Teleport and things like that. We talked a little bit about like weird offense and how it's kind of a little bit anti-meta into Gen 8 and things like that, but I think it's what we should really kind of touch on right here, is to not have us be here too long, is kind of checkmark or checkbox, checkmark, whatever, box check drafting, where we're picking, this is my grounded poison, this is my bulky water, this is my thing. Why that isn't necessarily a good idea, and why people do things like that and end up with really clunky drafts that don't play well into each other. What is like kind of the best way to illustrate that idea in your guys' opinion?
So I think all these like checkboxes are a great way for like newer players to understand drafting. It's like learning the rules, and then you learn how to break the rules, right? This team, it doesn't need this. It doesn't need, fill in blank, grounded poison. If it doesn't need that, why would you draft it? Then you have more slots for everything else. Yeah.
I think the two examples that we were saying, I think before we hit record, was that A is grounded poisons, because setting up a T-Spike, you can't just like clap your hands and a T-Spike is set up. Like if you have a really offensive team, you can pressure them on not to set up T-Spikes, or you can just like, really punish that turn that they use. So, in one of my drafts, like my literal only mon that cares about being affected by T-Spikes is Necrozma. And they were like, you have to have grounded poison, otherwise like the T-Spiker will like, hurt Necrozma. And it's like, no, I have a bunch of offense. Like I'll just attack the T-Spiker. And then the other thing is like, I think speed gaps are really silly. Like people who are like, I have to get base 90 mon because I have a 100 and an 80, and like it's got to be like symmetrical or whatever. Like I think that's weird. But I think the other thing is a lot of people hyperfixate on elite speed and will like draft like a Talonflame for a draft that Talonflame does not go very well on, because they just want that elite speed and don't really consider how it meshes with the rest of the draft. Not saying Talonflame's a bad mon, it's a great mon, but people don't really think further than that, I think, sometimes, and that can be that can lead to quite unsuccessful drafts.
And I think one thing, particularly in Gen 9, that I try to do, because one thing I really struggle with in general is drafting. It's by far the weakest part of my game, and I've been talking a lot about this, is when you do kind of get, check marky and like, you're really trying to fit this role, your teams end up, like you said before, super balancy, and I don't think that works well this gen in particular. So I think teams like this are really getting punished a lot of the times, especially because these mons, they're not really thought about how they're meshing together and how like the offense is playing the offense, the defense is complementing each other, things like that, to where like your teams just feel clunky as shit. I know like my most recent BBR team, I hated it. It was a terrible team. And in my head, I went through and I was like, I got all the things I need. I got the things that Valiant likes. I got the things that she likes. I'm good to go. And I have never hated building with a team more in my life, because everything was like, well, this is my, this is my removal option. This is my fucking Talonflame. That is my fast mon, that didn't fit on the team at all. Like
flexibility is so much more important, and like doing checkbox is the antithesis of drafting flexibility. So it's just like it's I don't know, it's different. The other thing too that I've noticed people doing that I actually had no idea people did until very recently was like the type charts, where people will like put in a team into a type chart and then see the type chart, and then it's like, okay,
I have three ice weaknesses. I need another ice resist.
I have 3 ice weaknesses and 1 resist, therefore I need another resist or something. And it's like that's such a bad way to look at a draft. Or like I think there was one draft where it was like Lando plus Slowbro, and like the rest of the team was like relatively ground weak, and they were like,
I need a ground.
You're gonna lose to ground, and I'm like, I have a Lando team and a Slowbro that are coming every single week. I don't think so. You know what I mean? So that can kind of stop your thinking. It can limit the way that you think about drafts quite easily.
Oh, 100%.
I think it is useful to have 2 resists to the important typings, being like ground ice. Not really. It's more of a coverage move.
Yeah.
Outside of Galarian Darmanitan, of course. I can get behind 1 ice resist, being your steel type usually. But something that I really subscribe to is a really small, compact defensive core. In PPL with Uzi, you see the Tinglu and the Alamomola. If something can break past those 2 mons, then you're going to be weak to it. It's fine. You can revenge those things offensively. But having that little duo, it stops so much of the meta with only 2 slots. And then you have 4 slots for the rest of the team to do whatever you want. Yeah. I find that to be a super useful tool in team building. Like in my World Cup team that I was spamming, I had Jirachi plus Swampert. And if something was good into those 2, I was weak to it defensively. But that's okay because I had 4 offensive pieces that can overwhelm those sort of things. And I wasn't relying on that, like, walling the entire team. They're just there to slow down the opponent's threats, to give me more time to get my threats going. And I feel like that kind of archetype, I don't know if you can really call it an archetype, but that sort of like draft planning is super nice. I really enjoy that. So I think that's something that might be a little bit more common going forwards, getting that, because that allows you for some luxury offense, what I like to call it, your gouging fires. No utility, but it wins the game really good. And that sort of thing only works if you have a compact defensive core that I found. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just a clunky team. Anyways,
yeah, I think
that's my piece.
There you go. Yeah, I think the main thing is, again, just how do these mons even play into each other? If you have X mon that does one thing, but it's the one thing you need on the checklist, you have a useless slot in 90% of instances, and you have it sitting in the back for, X resistance, it's tough. So, we have this last one is an interesting one because I know you feel very strongly about this, Addison. We've already kind of alluded to it a little bit here. And I think I agree, but maybe to a lesser extent, is a usage-based tiering philosophy. I'm pretty sure Zezo's pretty big on this too, right? Where the idea is, at least I think he said this when I've talked to him before, is if a mon's not getting drafted at a certain price point, why the fuck is it at the price point? Like consistently, not it didn't get drafted in this one tournament, but the last 3-4 tournaments, it's been at 16 points and it's not getting drafted. Why is it at 16? It needs to go down to 14. It needs to go down to 13. That's kind of the general idea. My question is, and where I kind of want to take this, is where is that line drawn? Because I feel like a lot of the time, mons are priced at certain points. I don't know, maybe I'm misunderstanding this completely, but mons are also priced at certain points to not allow certain combinations because, those luxury offense pieces alongside some of the other more expensive things, if we take away 3 points and we let, X 10 pointer get upgraded to 10 or to a 13 pointer, a lot of these teams get overwhelming, at least in my mind. I guess, how to what degree do you think this tiering or usage-based tiering philosophy should go?
So to me, the short and easy answer is kind of like a pretty big degree. I think it changes between 8 mon and 11 mon though. When you're thinking about tiering for 11 mon, you have to be a little bit more conscious of like, okay, most of the board is going to get taken. What is the overall value of these mons as individual pieces? But when you're thinking about 8 mon, let me paint an example. So on the draft board in DCL Sword and Shield, regular Darmanitan, I think, is either 4 or 5 points. And, I think that's, you don't see that mon very, frequently. But, if you told someone that is it 6?
6,
All right.
yeah.
Well, I
Still
didn't
pretty
know
low,
which one, so
yeah.
it's 5.
Mhm.
Yeah. Like,
If we're
or
talking
like,
Sword
I
and
don't know.
Shield.
Yeah, or like Lucario, I think is like 6, or like, whatever. Like Heliolisk was like 9 and now it's 6. Like I'm thinking about mons like that.
Mhm.
Mons that
Yeah.
again are decent mons but provide no like sort of roll compression on your 8-mon draft. Obviously they're good mons in themselves, but if you pick up a Heliolisk, it means that you're limiting your roll compression among like the rest of your team. So to me it's like the end of that point is kind of when the mon starts getting genuinely looked at. And I think it truly might lead to a tier list in Sword and Shield because there are only a slew of mons that like get picked in Sword and Shield where you see a very sort of like almost like top heavy and bottom heavy tier list with not a lot in between. But I think that's kind of just is what it is. I think that's just what it is because you have a bunch of really solid mons and you have a bunch of really not so solid mons. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it really necessarily stops many places. I mean, I think it's something that has to happen gradually. I think, if you have a Heliolisk that was 9 points and then you drop to 6 and it's never picked up, and then you drop to 5 and it's never picked up, and you drop to 4 and it's never picked up. How many fucking team tours is that at that point? So like, there's a limit, but it doesn't happen across just one tournament. That's kind of my philosophy on it, and I think
that's
it's going to develop healthier play.
I think that's actually fair. I guess I play a lot more 11 than I do 8 mon. So I guess I'm mostly thinking about it from that perspective in my mind, where, again, most of these mons are getting drafted. I mean, I was looking to make some transactions in BBL, like, there's fucking nothing here for me to pick up. There's no Pokemon left anymore. But I'm also playing in my buddy Kaz's league, and it's 8 mon. This is multi-gen, 3 gens. And I remember I was drafting an Usum, and there was a bunch of guys in 4 point. It was like fucking Entei, Lucario. I'm like, these guys are drip. I want to draft these guys. They're hella cheap. But then we're drafting them, and I'm like, I can't fucking draft this guy. Like, I physically can't draft this guy, or my team's terrible. And I was like, this is lame. All right, I'll get random 4-point shitter that actually gives me, some kind of defensive or utility or some kind of reliable whatever it might be, right? So, like, I guess that makes sense, especially in 8 mon, where like what you can pick with the limited amount of slots you have is so much more restrictive than it is in 11 mon or like in a Wi-Fi scene or something like that. So I guess the tier lists are just going to look different.
The question is, at what point does the strength and inherent power of the mon outweigh its lack of roll compression that it gives the entire draft? And ultimately, like, again, the draft that I've been doing quite well with in DCL has a Galarian Darmanitan on it. This Galarian Darmanitan was worth 12 points. And it's like, if you said that to a Wi-Fi player like 5 years ago,
you should to a Wi-Fi player right fucking now, they'd have an aneurysm. They'd lose their mind. That's like Pokemon Jesus to Wi-Fi guys. Yeah.
But the reality is, I'll use L5's like term for this, is it's luxury offense. It's offense that isn't, it's good offense, but it comes at a cost with the rest of your team. So you have to have a really coherent like idea with the rest of your team to truly fit it in. Or be willing to sacrifice certain pieces that are considered necessary, which may or may not be. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I do genuinely think, I think in particular, G-Darm, Lele, and Zygarde are 3 mons off the top of my head, at least in a Sword and Shield tier list, that, can be way lower because they never get picked up. And it's like, they should drop. I think one other example that I think will happen with Scarlet and Violet as well is Blood Moon or Saluna. I feel like that shit never gets picked up, and it's like 15, 14 points or something like that. I think it's going to drop even further. Because again, it's a ground type that doesn't have rocks and, utility.
Yeah, anyway. For me, the limit is like when you do actually see it. Is it massively overperforming the price?
Yeah.
Like, for example, this past DPL season, we dropped Victini by 2 points because we realized it had never been drafted in like the history of Sun and Moon in DPL.
No shit.
And it had gone down like 1 point every few seasons. We're like, I just put it in 13. And then it got picked up and it had like an 80-something% win rate. Like, okay. maybe
move it up on
Maybe these teams were too strong with 13-point Victini. But maybe it's not the case, right? But maybe it is. Yeah. So at some point, there's like an inherent value of the Pokemon where like if you're allowing it for too cheap, the teams that do end up drafting it become so much stronger relative to everything else that maybe they want to go back up. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't ever drop Pokemon like that. I think it was good that we dropped it to 13 and we actually saw it in the tier for once. but then it's like people wake up and wait, Victini's actually good. I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the sort of thing that like I would like to prevent if I could. That's something that we saw with Zygarde and Oras, I think. I think it's dropped so far down that it's like such a good mon for the price now. I'm not saying it's just because I lost to it in week 7. Like obviously, it's a good Pokemon. It's been drafted in DPL and now DCL, both in a similar style team with Gardevoir, Thunderous Eye.
I mean, it was the same
Uxie.
guy. It was both of them.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we have our Zygarde Believer, and it's been a really valuable piece. So I see Zygarde probably moving back up.
Yeah.
But I wonder how many Pokemon are like that, where it's like nobody really sees it. So it's like, oh, the assumption is it bad.
Yeah, incentivize using it a little bit.
And then also simultaneously, like, you have to be that person who's willing to step up to the plate and raise your hand and say, I will be that person and try that thing. And that's fucking scary to be in that position sometimes. And you don't want to, like, draft something that might truly be ass. Like, you don't know. So
for me, this season, I am a big believer in Terra Urshifu Rapid. I have been a big believer for years, but I've never had an opportunity to draft it until now. I was like, okay, we're finally going to commit to it. And all of a sudden, people are voting to raise the price. Just because the one time it got drafted, it looked amazing.
Yeah.
And part of that is because I think the team that we drafted is super good. I love that team so much. It's just great. But how many mons are like this? They're just like considered bad by the community or undraftable, but then you do draft it and it's amazing. Yeah. How many Pokemon are like that? I wonder. I don't know the answer to that.
And also, like, truly, what is the harm of making a mon that might be really good a few points lower if it means that they get that usage in the first place? At least then now we know, because if we leave them there, then like
I see the vision,
we'll never know, right?
And
like,
this is something that I do myself with DPL, and then I'm on the tiering counselor for DCL and all the Smogon tournaments. But in DPL in particular, I feel a responsibility to try to make sure every Pokemon on my draft board is at least considerable, or at least considered to be drafted on the right style of team. That's something that, it's an impossible task. We're never going to get there 100%, but we try to get closer and closer through every season. And like this past season, we did a patch note stock, which showed every single Pokemon that we dropped, every single Pokemon we raised, and the reason why for some of the more impactful ones. And I thought that was really great. I want to do that again next season. But it's like literally across all the tiers, like 200 point adjustments. Like I'm doing what I can here, but it's really hard to justify dropping something like 5 points in a season. Like that's never gonna happen. But like the super strong performance up 2 points. I think we only had like a handful of Pokemon that were like that. Switch Blastoise being one of them. But and then a few Pokemon dropped 2 points, some dropped like 3 points, but those are like the extreme ones. Most of the time, you can only really justify 1 point at a time. That's what I found anyways, and outside of that, you're kind of getting to more like I'm super based, I'm going to put Xmon in 5 points because I don't see it, and that's cool. Like, I don't really buy into that as much as like the slow descent of the Pokemon that are like 0% drafted.
Yeah.
I think at that point though, you just have to make... Oh, go ahead.
I still respect like the BST, the move pool, like the idea of the Pokemon in my head. Like Terrakion is like a good example of Pokemon that you think in your head, oh yeah, that's roughly a 12-point mon in theory. Like the Pokemon feels like it should be 12, but then it's never picked up at 12, so you end up like, do I drop it? Because in my head it's still like a 12-point mon. I don't know, that's just an example.
What I was going to say is I think that one draft league in here, really cool before we move on to the next, the fan questions and stuff like that, I think that I don't know if it's like a subconscious thing, I think draft league players put more value on offensive Pokemon too. Like the way we 100%. Think of Pokemon, like the more offensive pieces these Pokemon, like fucking Entei. Entei's not very good, but Entei does a lot of damage if it gets in, right? We click Sacred Fire, we click E-Speed, it does a shit ton of damage. So you think of it in like 4 points, and you're like, what the hell is Entei doing in 4 points? Well, it's down there not getting drafted. Obviously, I'm being hyperbolic and saying down there, but like it's down there not getting drafted because it doesn't do anything else. It's hard to fit, it's hard to position, it's hard to use, opposed to, you know, X other breaker that also has these important resistances and, you know, this roll compression aspect to it. So I think a lot of the time we see big offensive numbers though, and we're like, can't have that too low or things might get out of hand, which might be true to an extent. But I just think it's interesting because with these incredible defensive pieces, you don't see them really rise a lot. You know, they kind of sit where they're at, and, you know, especially too because it makes your teams work out a little bit nicer when they're a little bit lower and you can get a little bit more value out of your fat. But a lot of these bonds are probably a little bit better than they're actually priced too defensively in some of these generations.
Well, I think the idea in draft that's like pretty common is your high tier is your offense, and your mid to low tier is your defense. That's something that you see very commonly because on average, right, the top offensive mons are doing things that the lower offensive mons could never dream of. But the defense side, it's a little bit closer. So you kind of lose less like ceiling value by doing it this way. You have your like unguardable offense, and then your defense is like kind of mid-price, low-price. It'll do the job most of the time. So that's something that's super common, and I think is honestly correct. I think if you're going to build like a more like balance-ish kind of thing where you have your offense and you have your defense, that's the way to do it. And that what that does lead to is these lower offensive mons, they're just never drafted, because why would you draft them instead of, you know, Tapu Koko instead of Heliolisk? Like the difference is massive. Whereas like what's a good example? Something like Necrozma. You know, if you think of it as like a bulky psychic, what can it check that Musharna can't? You know what I'm saying? Like that's an extreme example, but I don't even know if that entirely makes sense in context, because Necrozma isn't only a
I get the
psychic,
idea though.
But for this example, you know,
no, that's really fair.
It's not a big difference.
Definitely,
but it's like a 10, 11 point difference in price. Sure, I'll take a Musharna.
Yeah. You need to check the fighting, you know.
I think Musharna's great.
Yeah, I do. Gen 7 Musharna went on a generational run. That guy was the goat.
Right?
Fuck your Gallade and your Medi. That's my goat.
I won a big tournament with a Musharna, and it was like Musharna balance. It was like Mega Venus, Celesteela, Snorlax.
I've always wanted to use
Hydreigon.
Musharna.
I drafted it in Kaz League in Gen 7 because it's like, yo, all the broken fighting type Megas. I don't like those guys. Fuck Megalop. Fuck Mega Medi. I'm getting me a Musharna for 3 points, and I'm going to town. But I think it's time. Well, let's jump on into the fan questions and things like that, so we can keep speeding along. We're waffling a ton today. First up, we have one from my boy Fat Halbert here saying, "Explain your draft strategies." I guess we've kind of talking about this a little bit, so we can kind of. This is a perfect segue. Do you just go for the most broken thing on the board, or try and draft archetypes or proven cores? At what point do you shift from taking the objectively more powerful mon to one that synergizes better with your team? So I guess it's more so like your early drafting strategies. I'll let you guys say it as well, but me personally, when first round at the very least, I always tell this to everybody, especially if I have people in my server asking me like, hey, what do I get round 1? I think if you're taking it super serious and you want to do as well as you can, take the most broken thing on the board round 1 and deal with it from there. If you're playing in a more casual and you're like, I drafted fucking Mega Gallade the last 3 out of my last 5 leagues, don't draft Mega Gallade then. But if you're objectively trying to do as well as you can, draft the best one on the board round 1.
Yeah. I mostly agree. I think I take it maybe slightly further. I try and draft like the best mon on the board for the first 2 rounds and then fill the rest of the team out. It's like, I'm not always like consistently, but that's kind of like the general thing that I do, because I hate matchups where I have a team where it's like you have one broken guy and then a bunch of like 12 pointers, and then the one broken guy has bad matchups and you're left with a bunch of 12 pointers.
And you're just
yeah, literally. So when I'm drafting, especially in 8-mon, but I remember I did this in PPL too when I drafted DOS, and then I was like, all right, I'm not even gonna think about synergy. I'm just gonna draft the next best mon on the board in Gren, and that ended up being a really good combination, as L5 and I both know. But at the time, there wasn't really any like grounds for it synergistically, because they were just both fast, speedy guys with like, win comp potential. But ultimately, like, I just drafted the 2 best mons on the board, and either DOS had a great matchup or Gren a great matchup. And like, it just, if you're in a situation where you only have one of those mons with a great matchup, then it's a bit tougher. So I try and get 2 really good guys at least for all my drafts.
I think people tunnel on that too, of like, my round one guy, I need to get something that like immediately supports it super well. And sometimes like it ends up working out to where like there's something fucking great on the board that pairs perfectly, blah blah blah. But yeah, sometimes it's just getting the best two guys, especially if you're in the luxury of drafting 11 mon. You don't need to fill out, X synergistically. Like, you have 9 rounds to draft still. Like, there's a ton of time. Just get 2 really broken things, and then your team can kind of flow and mesh into each other as well. What about you, L5? Some similar?
Yeah.
I think there's a middle ground here. So sometimes I'm like, yes, I want the most broken thing. I'll figure it out later. You see this in the Infernal Armory SV1. We had Garchomp round 1, which to some people was questionable, but Garchomp pairs well with a lot of stuff. So I was like, this is a really great Pokemon in general, and it leaves itself open to any teammate really. And then the next round we're like, okay, we need Terrazarud because it's the GOAT. Like, going into the draft, we were like, we're gonna have at least one Terrazarud, and this is where it fit the best. So like, okay, Terrazarud, awesome, great Pokemon. And then we saw Deoxys Speed was still on the board, and we're like, it's expensive, but it's a great Pokemon, so we get Deoxys Speed. And now we have this trio of like really powerful Pokemon, and then it's just a puzzle for the last 5 rounds. You figure out what can like make it work. And then you look at the matchups for that team. A lot of it we're weak to stuff defensively, but our offense is so good that we can just overpower a lot of stuff. And the team's 4-2, and it should have been 5-1. I will say, or it could have been 6-0 if a few turns went differently. So like, offense is king in drafts, and that's been shown for a long time. It's very consistent. Offense is what wins you games. So I think there is that. Then there's also stuff like our SV2, which was also a very successful draft. That's the one that I've been using. Meowscarada, Terapagos were our round 1 and round 2. Meowscarada, I felt like that was the best mon on the board at the time. Then Terapagos were like, this will fit anything that comes back round 3. There's no third mon that's bad with Meowscarada, Terapagos. It's so open-ended. Maybe there was something a little bit more like broken in terms of like maybe a Gouging Fire would be harder to check than a Terapagos, but it gives you so much to the team, and then it works well with Meowscarada, right? You have your offense, you have your emergency button for the offensive build, or Terapagos could be a spinner for like a more like bulky offense where you kind of want the removal if you need it. So it's more open-ended and it fits the team better. It leaves us open with more options, because something I really hate is when you're like planning a draft out super in advance and then you get sniped and you're like, the team's gonna be terrible now. I like having multiple options where like Meowscarada, Terapagos, you could do anything with that. That's something I value a lot.
No, yeah, that's really fair. So nice little middle ground. It just depends on the type.
What was the second part of that?
At
what point do you shift from taking the objectively more powerful mon to one that synergizes better with your team? For me, that's usually the round 3, round 4, round 5 kind of things where you're trying to build the puzzle. This is what works with my top 2. This is what fills the gaps that are in my top 2. Like,
I think that's especially the case in 8 mon.
Another physical breaker, so we had Urshifu Rapid. Because Meowscarada is good, but it has matchups where it's not going to carry offensively. It's more of like a pivot or like a spiker or whatever you need that week. So having something that really packs a punch, great Terra abuser, because our first 2 aren't great Terra users, so that fills the gap, and it's also a great Pokemon. And then Latios is like a ground resist, a good speed tier. You have your screens and the Healing Wish option, which is great offensively. That can get you out of so many bad matchups. It's a good Scarfer, which is something that we wanted to take the pressure off of Meow to be the only Scarfer, so it's something that fits the team very nicely. The resists on it are great for the team. Obviously, we're not building the team around Latios, we're using it as a supporting piece. So stuff like that, round 3, round 4, you're trying to solve the puzzle.
Yeah. 100%, especially in 8 mon too. Like, you ain't got that many slots. You kind of have to look a little bit more bigger picture with the team after those first 2 rounds minimum, because not much room to waffle around. You're gonna end up with a bunch of big assholes otherwise. So That's definitely fair. Our second question, though, comes from Free Day here saying, describe what the average week is like playing in the sweatiest of team tours. How are you prepping with a team? How many mocks do you have to grind out? How many hours a day are you spending thinking about Pokemon? Stuff like that. Wake up, don't shower, jump on your computer, start taking some mocks. Now, you guys, I played in a few team tours. I've played in Clash multiple times. I played I got picked up at mids in DPL this last season, things like that. But you guys obviously have much more extensive and definitely have taken a little bit more sweaty than I have in the past. Let's start here. How many mocks a week do you think you're taking when you're preparing for a game?
This season, probably averaging around 10.
Mm-hmm.
I'd
This
say for
season,
me,
10 is
the
in from
hardest
10
I've
different
tried
people, or
in any tour.
replaying the same people multiple times, and that adding up to 10?
Both.
Both? Okay, so it's including like, if
Sometimes
me and you
you'll get a
mock, I
remock.
smoke you, and then you're like, wait, I changed something, let's do this shit again real quick.
Well, one thing that I was doing this whole tournament was building multiple styles of team and seeing what felt the best, and then sometimes making a mash of the two. Of like, I liked this set, but I also like this set. Let's make a team with both of them, and then fill out the rest of the team so it makes sense. So, including that, it was probably more closer to like 12, 13 mocks total. But with the actual team that I'm bringing, I'm getting at least 6, 7 reps in with that exact version. That being said, this is not normal for me. This is like the high end. Like previously, I'm more of like the 3 to 5 mocks. I'm good to go. I'm feeling confident. I'm just gonna go.
I do a lot more mocks, and I think I've been on team environments that do a lot more mocks and put a lot of effort into it, for better or for worse. I'd say this season on average, I'm probably doing about 20. I do the same thing at L5 said, where I basically make 2 or 3 teams and then test all 3 of them and then sort of say, okay, these are sort of the best things. Especially like my sort of play style that we talked about at the beginning of like trying to find different puzzles for your opponent to like figure out. Sort of mashing them onto the same team is always quite effective, but it takes a couple team builds to like truly get there. But I would say, it's like about 20. Like the first half of the week is very much figuring out what you want to do, and then the back half of the week for me is very much like just getting reps in with the team you ended up sort of deciding. You will find people on team tours who will not build until Friday or Saturday or something like that,
and blitz through.
That can upset teammates, or it could
especially
work for
if they
them
fucking lose.
Like, well, that's the thing. So like it's different from person to person. I think it's one of those things that a captain. I mean, this is something that so few people really truly get to understand. One of the many things besides skill and activity that a captain has to consider is,
time management.
Are they going to be available during the week, or are they just going to show up on Saturday or Sunday and then play? So at least that's for me. So I do it throughout the week, and I do the majority of my building and playing actually on like Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, if I'm not playing Saturday, are quite literally like 1 or 2 mocks each a day, and that's kind of it. But it's very stressful. There's so many. But I think the thing that's sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I was just gonna say the thing that's very interesting. I won't name this team, but I think there's a team that I've witnessed. I don't mean like a team that is like a huge. I'm thinking of like specific groups of people who overmock, who will basically like build a team, mock, and then realize that their team like loses to like that mock, and then specifically try and like build a team to answer the mock and stuff like that. And
That's
I think it's a very losing way to like prep for like weeks, because you are all of a sudden like you don't have a coherent like game plan anymore. You're just constantly like counter teaming the mocks over and over again. So if you're mocking 80 times doing that, that's not productive.
Yeah, it's something I had to talk to Uzi about, because what'll happen is he'll mock Amil. And if you know anything about Amil, he has the craziest builds ever, and that extends to his mock builds as well. So he's like, oh, this build is pretty good, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do against the
stockpile
exact Amil set. Yeah, something crazy like that. I'm like, really, you don't have to put too much weight on an Amil mock. Like, sure, it's good to get the reps in and like get your problem solving going, because like he's gonna throw something weird at you and you're gonna have to solve it in the moment. It's not something you can plan for. But we're not gonna change the team around beating Amil's pace. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
Within
something
reason,
more,
within
like,
reason. Yeah, if
gameplay.
it's like, oh shit, how did I miss this? And Alan brought it for sure. But yeah, if it's like
but that's
some like
that's
no
so rare.
attacks
That's so
Latias
rare.
that you just got rolled by, it's like, oh man.
It's one of two things though. It's either you get an Amel or Amel-esque mock where you're mocking someone who is a very creative builder that isn't very reflective of your actual opponent, and then that kind of creates like rifts in your actual team building process. But I think the other thing that happens that is so important, I think, to avoid if you're ever playing a team tour, is not taking people fully seriously when they will look at your paste and go, your team loses to this set, that the 6 that you brought and all your moves and like the actual team build loses to this set that I've just crafted after looking at your team, and then they'll make you run like 12 mocks against that set, and then you're like, oh, gotta change your team now. And I think that's something that like is not good,
Not
because
useful.
you're not going from the perspective of someone who has a fresh outlook on the matchup. You have someone who's just looked at your team and said, yeah, your team kind of loses to this, and it's like, okay,
it's
obviously
so rare.
Oh, go ahead.
It's so rare for that to be like a useful thing, right? Because if I'm prepping with your paste open, that's a completely different thing than I'm looking at the 8v8 and thinking, what is the most consistent thing that I can bring? So what I do for my mock builds for other people is I'll build like pretty safe stuff, pretty like cookie cutter, like this is like the most obvious set. They're not going to be exactly my build. You know, it's just not going to happen. They're going to have some curveballs that they're going to throw at you, but I can't prepare you for the curveballs in advance. That's something that you have to figure out in the game, right? Because, you know, I'm preparing you for the standard sets, and if they bring like Choice Scarf Skarmory, got to figure that out in the moment, you know? We're not mocking versus Choice Scarf Skarmory. But yeah. And then what I'll do is I'll make pretty safe plays. I'll only really double if it's like super obvious. And I'm just like the NPC mock build.
Yeah.
Like I will click the obvious button most of the time. I'll bring the obvious set. Is your build safe against the obvious stuff?
Yeah.
And after that, you know, that's where my teammates come in with the more outlandish prep, especially like Panda and Nick numbers. He always brings something crazy. So we have both sides of the spectrum there. But I think it's a lot more useful to have like that cookie cutter mock. I'm good into the standard stuff, and then the other stuff I can figure out when I get there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think building with the paste open on the second monitor is always a funny thing. I always get like, obviously this is a completely different scenario in the sense that like this is me mocking for my Wi-Fi games, but I really appreciate it. I have a ton of people who offer to mock me for these games, things like that, with no return. You know, they're not getting them back, I tell you that. But there'll be games where I'm like, you got my shit open on the second monitor, huh? And they'll be like, yeah. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
Well, and I respect that. I'll be like, all right, well, I'm gonna forfeit this one because we're not getting anything out of this anymore. And they'll be like, yeah. Or like, I'll be like, you saw me make that double in the mock before, huh? And they're like, yeah. And they'll call me on my shit like crazy, and I'll be like, okay, well, we're gonna keep going. So yeah, it's there's definitely a happy middle ground. I'm definitely a psychopath mocker. I do it a lot, and that's just for these fucking Wi-Fi games and things like that. So I totally get it. And when you have like the stress of other people, you know, their results being contingent on you playing well in your game, you're gonna take it a little bit more seriously and things like that. So I totally get it.
It's just important to like trust in your original build and your original game plan and not change it because of someone else's mock or something like that. I think that's just the thing to keep in mind if you're doing like 30-40 mocks, is like,
yeah, just understand that
don't
within
lose
reason.
sight of the original concept, right? Yeah, and that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. Alrighty, guys. Well, we're gonna jump into our game of the week. This is going to be a DCL game from, I don't believe was it this week or was it the week before? This undead
Week 7,
Aster.
about a week ago.
About a week ago. Okay, big. So we have this is going to be a Gen 7 game between Undead and Aster. If you want to give some background knowledge and context, and then if you guys want to pull up the replay, I can't share my screen. I'm just going to fuck up the face cams, but I'm going to play it on fast, and well, we can kind of watch through it together.
I'm
We'll pause
gonna
if we
open
need
my
to.
window really quick.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's the context, Undead? Or L5, oops.
So this is a series decider game. Currently, Infernal Armory, which is Aster's team, is up 4-3. Now, Undead, if he loses, he's out of their team is out of the tournament. They don't make playoffs. If he wins, then at minimum they're guaranteed a tiebreak for that 4th seed. So this is a absolute must-win for Undead. For Aster, the stakes are a little bit lower. If Aster wins, we get the second seed rather than the third seed. So it's not a huge difference.
Okay, mostly it's huge for
plays each other.
Yeah, it's huge for Undead, which is the site that we're watching from Book of Pupoon, which is a fucking hilarious name. Not so much for Aster. Obviously, Aster's trying to win though. But yeah, it's Gen 7 Z captains. I'm assuming we got a Z Zygarde, and that's the only one that came here, or is...
So let me see. Week 7.
And the other side is going to be Lando Kart, right?
Yes, Lando Kart, and then it's Zygarde Salazzle as the...
Salazzle is, okay.
disease.
I was going to say maybe it's Salazzle. I didn't know if there's something on the bench that maybe might be rocking out with it otherwise. Really, Zygarde looks really, really fucking scary later on in this game, depending on what it goes for. But we're going to go ahead and press that play button with sound off. We're going to go on fast too, so you can keep up with me. If you're ever talking to, let me know. We can, we'll come back right before we started. I'll pause anytime you want to make any kind of commentary in place. I have not seen anything of this game. I have no idea who wins, so I'll kind of commentate and, go as we go. Actually, we'll move it down to normal so I can not have to pause it and I can actually talk about it and things like that.
For this week, I don't really want to do like a
in-depth
full analysis of the game because we've kind of waffled for a little bit too long anyways.
That's fine.
But we can just play the game.
Yeah, we'll watch. All right, so we're going to lead Uxie and the lead Metagross. Probably just, lead Toxic into the Uxie as it ends up getting a foul play. I was going to say Rock Trade, but it does not end up being the case. Now we're going to see Rocks go up on both sides as, big foul play damage off and Rocks going up. Meteor Mash doing 25, Helmet into a U-turn. Okay. Salazzle comes out, takes a little bit of damage from Rocks. This thing's actually really difficult to switch into for Aster. Fire Blast does not a ton of damage, 21%. A little bit of leftovers back. Lantern's going to pivot out on some kind of scouting for Scarf, probably, I'm potentially assuming. Metagross is going to double back out. Lantern doubles out into Uxie. Jeez. Lots of switching. A little bit of toxic damage. Lantern's going to come back out finally, trying to Volt Absorb this Electro move potentially. Hidden Power is going to do 5% as Surf does literally nothing behind the light screen. Toxic does not hit as the terrain goes away finally. Okay, hits this turn, which is good. Toxic's gonna come out onto the Manectric. This is Mega Manectric, just not megging because of Lightning Rod, yeah? I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say, just so we can have like a decent pivot into Volt Switch so we're not risking Orlando just like fucking dying. Surf comes out into the Kartana.
The rest of the team doesn't really switch into Manectric very well, so being able to block the Volt Switch is really important into the Lantern.
Oh yeah. I guess, fire, ice, electric kind of smokes everything else really, really bad. I mean, it's super chip now, which is really good. It ends up just getting sacked off to this Mega DNC right away, so don't have to worry about that anymore. Cart comes out, kind of showing, hey, I'm Choice Scarf Kartana. I'm clicking Leaf Blade right here into the Dia. Salazzle's going to pivot out. No Sizzler, interesting. We're going to see a Leaf Blade, 30%. Scout for a Scarf here. As the opposing Salazzle comes out, Fire Blast, just 34. Jesus. Leftovers are going to proc. Lantern.
I think this Protect was kind of bad. It allows the Lantern to come in for free.
Especially because that next Fire Blast didn't kill, right? So it's not like... I mean, Crit would have killed you anyways even after a Protect, so you're probably better off.
Well, it reveals Wikiberry, but we didn't know that at the time. So being able to 2-hit KO on the Switch could have been potentially big. It wouldn't have worked out anyways, but I think it was the correct call to call the Switch out on Salazzle.
Oh, we see the Double Dance Feeny popping. Okay. Calm Mind and Reflect, and Iron Defense up, but is this going to live through like a Z Zygarde or a Ban Zygarde? Probably. Alright, not through Z.
Special Zygarde.
Oh, big Z Sludge Wave.
This is for the Tangela on the bench.
Oh, okay, makes sense. Okay, see that's good information to know because I'm like, there's no fucking arrows resist at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so down goes
it's
that
also
goes.
HP Ice for Lando. It makes sense.
Oh yeah, for sure. Tiger's gonna pivot back out. Kartana. The Scarf Cart's looking pretty manageable actually because we do Earth Power is gonna pick this off. So is this fully special? We've just seen like maybe last move like E-Speed or something. Because Earth Power HP Ice is gonna bring this thing down super super low. Rock Polish, E-Speed last move? No. Okay, down goes to Earthquake. Scissors going to be able to come out, though. Bullet Punch, pick off the Lando. Life Orb Scissor. Okay, that makes sense why it was not pivoting in on the the fucking Kartana earlier. Bullet Punch is going to pick off the Salazzle, so Bullet Punch endgame. There you go. And this ended up bringing bring Chrome Cabal into playoffs, right? That's your team, right, Addison, or no?
Yeah, so the past few weeks we've like had this record of like starting our weeks like down like 1-3 or 1-4, and we've had to like climb back to like a tie or a win from the back. So this was a situation where we were down 3-4, and we needed tie against Armory in order to get into the tiebreaker against Madmen, which we're in right now. So if we lost this game, season was over, and there would have been no tiebreak.
So I mean, Undead played it really well. I think the Lantern put an OT too. He did hella work. The special side guard, it was a cool build. There we go. And then of course we have to end off with everybody's favorite segment of the week, Waffler of the Week. I also have no context on this. I don't know where the screenshot is from, but it's also like the exact opposite of what we've been talking about like throughout this podcast and the 3 episodes we've had prior to this. I'm going to read off the quote. I'll flash on screen. Hopefully I'll remember to in post. Yell at me in the comments if I forget, but I should. We have someone named V saying, Terra Zarude is like reverse King Gambit, or reverse Terra King Gambit. So far, it doesn't sound that bad, because you don't know which way we're reversing, you know, what exactly we're saying. Zarude is always super predictable in its Terra, whereas Gambit will have options. I feel like Zarude is like one of the most versatile mons with Terra humanly possible. What's the context with this one? Is this in like the Smogon server, or... Addison?
No, I don't.
Oh no! Yeah, you have no idea. Just saw it somewhere in the place.
It's just going around.
Okay.
I think maybe it was a Smogon thing, but I'm not
okay.
sure.
I think that was
not. Is this not Gravy?
No.
No, I think it just is V. Yeah,
okay,
I mean,
a different person.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. No, I don't. It doesn't look like a very similar profile picture either. Yeah,
no,
very interesting take, because it's like the exact opposite. I feel like, but I don't know. I think that's a perfect one for the podcast because of how much we've talked about Terra Zarude being him and Terra King Gambit not being him. So I thought that was
the opposite of everything we stand for.
Yeah, and we're coming for you. We're pissed. This actually isn't Waffle of the Week. This is a direct call out. No, but yeah, I thought that was a pretty silly one. That's a good choice for a Waffler of the Week. We always have a few options though. And again, if you guys ever want to submit, you know, like Waffler of the Week, Game of the Week, we've been kind of like leaning a lot on these tour games for Game of the Week, or like a lot of the Wi-Fi games that are going on. But if you guys have any absolute bangers, I am watching them when you guys put them in the Game of the Week chat. If you have any that you think that might be it, go ahead and put it in there. If you have any funny Waffle of the Week, like my favorite one by far is still the guy who was like, sorry, my dog got struck by lightning, I can't play, and then just ghosted the dude. I thought that was the funniest shit ever. So if you have any more funny moments like that, we'd like to keep it a little more lighthearted with Waffle of the Week. Let us know. Other than that, we're about done. Do you have anything you wanna plug or say before we head out, Addison?
Oh dear God. No. I guess I have been uploading my DCL games on my channel. I've paused because of like moving / my laptop not being great, but I will have them all up. So in a couple weeks time, probably from when this goes up, the full season will be on my channel. So if you want to check that out, gain some context for some of the stuff that we've talked about on the podcast, then that would be a great place to do so.
There's
already some games up there already.
There you go. Nice. Well, yeah, obviously Addison will be linked down below. L5 Odyssey will be linked down below as well. Any more parting words before we go, or are we good to go?
We're good to go.
Yeah, we're good to go. Thank you guys for watching again. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, drop a like on the video, sub to the channel if you haven't. Let us know who you want to see next as a guest on the podcast. And yeah, thank you for joining us again, Addison. We'll see you guys later. Adios.